In a small, struggling diner, Tasha, a single mother, faces a moment that could shatter her world. She's $3.25 short for a meal, and the birthday she promised her son, Malik, seems impossible. But as the cashier prepares to call the manager, Jasmine, a stranger at the counter, steps in without hesitation, paying for their meal and offering a chance that could change everything. In just one fateful moment, a simple act of kindness transforms Tasha's life and gives her hope where there was none. Will this one gesture spark a new beginning, or will the weight of the world pull them back into despair? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The rain didn't fall. It attacked, slamming against Jasmine Crockett's windshield like a warning shot from a world on edge. Houston's streets stretched out ahead, slick and empty, bathed in the cold shimmer of streetlights reflecting off puddles like broken promises. Jasmine had just left a heated summit on economic injustice, her mind still echoing with voices too often ignored. Mothers skipping meals, veterans denied care, children surviving off vending machine snacks. She had spoken with fire, exposing the rot behind polished charts. But now, driving alone through the storm, that fire flickered against the weight of reality. She pulled into a battered fast food place, faded sign, broken neon, a beacon for the weary. Inside, the air smelled of grease and resignation. No one noticed her, just another face among the forgotten. And in that moment, she preferred it that way. The door to the fast food joint creaked open, its sound piercing the silence like an unwelcome intrusion. A woman stepped inside, her clothes drenched from the rain, every inch of her soaked through. Tasha moved with a quiet urgency, her hand tightly clutching her son Malik's, guiding him through the door as if the weight of the world had momentarily been lifted off her shoulders. But the moment they crossed the threshold, that weight came rushing back. Malik, small and oblivious to the storm outside and the storm inside, beamed up at her with eyes full of excitement. His wide smile, untainted by the harshness of life, shone brighter than any streetlight that flickered in the rain-soaked city. "Mom, is today the party day?" he asked, his voice bright and eager. The innocent hope in his question hit Tasha like a punch to the gut. She forced a smile, her heart heavy with the truth she couldn't yet tell him. "Yes, baby," she replied, her voice trembling ever so slightly, betraying the weight of the lie. "Today's a special day." They moved to a small booth in the corner, where Tasha could feel the gaze of the few scattered patrons in the room, though none seemed to notice her as she and Malik settled in. The tables around them, filled with people lost in their own worlds, suddenly felt colder, more distant. Malik climbed up onto the seat with a grin, bouncing with anticipation. He was too young to understand the gravity of the moment, too innocent to sense that every smile she gave him was a mask for the panic racing in her chest. He was thrilled by the thought of a birthday party, his mind filled with simple joys. A slice of cake, a few presents, and perhaps some ice cream. Tasha, on the other hand, could barely hold it together. Her fingers brushed the edge of her pocket, feeling the cold metal of the coins inside. She had counted them 3 times already, $4, barely enough to pay for both their meals, let alone the dream of a celebration she had promised him. Her heart ached. How could she disappoint him? She couldn't, no matter how thin the string was she was walking on. She watched Malik's small hands unwrap the worn backpack slung over his shoulder, his excitement rising as he chattered away about dinosaurs in space, completely unaware of the silent calculations running through his mother's mind. She fought the pang of guilt gnawing at her, the bitter realization that she couldn't give him what he deserved. She was a mother who had promised him a party, a simple gift of joy, but in the end all she could offer was this, a meal that barely scratched the surface of what she had hoped to give. Yet somehow she pushed those thoughts aside. Today was special, she reminded herself. Today Malik was happy, and that she would protect at all costs. Tasha stood in front of the counter, her hands clammy, her heart pounding in her chest. The menu above was a blur of prices and pictures, each one more out of reach than the last. She had always imagined moments like this differently. Birthday parties, laughter, cake. But now she was trapped in the stark reality of what she could afford. Malik, standing at her side, pointed excitedly at the picture of a taco combo on the board. His eyes sparkled with the pure joy of a child, so full of hope it broke her heart. "Can I get that one, Mom?" The taco with the drink? His voice was laced with enthusiasm, his innocent excitement palpable. Tasha's throat tightened, the weight of his expectation crushing her. She turned to the cashier, trying to mask the panic threatening to bubble to the surface. Her hand moved to her purse, fingers grazing the few crumpled bills she had left. She could already hear the words she had to say next, the ones that would strip away any hope for a special day. She glanced back at Malik, who was still smiling up at her, so unaware of the struggle that churned inside her. "Just a minute, sweetie," she whispered, her voice barely a murmur. She shifted her gaze to the menu again, trying to block out the buzzing of uncertainty in her mind. With a shaky breath, she spoke, the words tasting bitter as they left her lips. "I'll take the smallest combo," she said, her voice steady but hollow. "No drink, no fries." The words felt like an admission of failure, a surrender to the cold reality that her son's birthday would not be what he had dreamed. The cashier nodded without looking up, punching in the order with a mechanical click, indifferent to the woman standing before him, trying to keep it together. Malik, blissfully unaware, bounced in place, his excitement unwavering. His small hands were still clenched in anticipation, his eyes glued to the counter, where the food was being prepared. He was so eager for the day to be perfect, not knowing that everything about this moment was far from it. "Are you going to eat, Mom?" he asked innocently, his voice soft, full of concern. The question sliced through Tasha's heart like a blade, her chest tightening with the sting of guilt. She smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a mask she had perfected over the years. "I'll eat later, sweetie," she said, her voice shaking just slightly. "Today is your day." The words felt empty as soon as they left her mouth. "Today is your day." The words that should have been filled with joy, hope, and celebration now felt like a cruel lie. She forced herself to nod, to hold his hand tightly, to make him believe that she was just as excited as he was. But inside she was falling apart. Her stomach growled painfully, a constant reminder of the empty space she had been trying to ignore, of the sacrifice she had made so that Malik could enjoy his special day. He didn't know, couldn't know. He was still a child, and this moment for him was magical. For her, it was a battlefield of survival, a quiet war that raged inside her heart. The cashier's voice cut through the air like a blade. "You're short $3.25, she said flatly, her tone devoid of any warmth, any empathy. Just a statement, a fact, as though it meant nothing more than the price of a pack of gum. Tasha's breath caught in her throat. The words reverberated inside her head, over and over, and for a moment she couldn't move, couldn't think. Her heart raced in her chest, every beat thudding like a warning. She had counted the money, she knew how much she had, just enough for a small meal, just enough to get by. But now the gap between what she had and what was needed felt like an insurmountable chasm. Her hand trembled as it reached into her purse, fingers scraping against the fabric, pulling out the crumpled bills she had hoped she wouldn't need. She sifted through the handful of change, coins slipping through her fingers like sand. Her breath became shallow, the walls of the fast food restaurant pressing in on her from all sides. She could feel the eyes of the others on her, the weight of their gazes, each glance like a judgment, a silent accusation. The ticking of the clock on the wall, the hum of the fryer in the back, the shuffling of trays, all of it blended into a single suffocating noise. A sound that made her feel small, insignificant, invisible. The group of young men at the table to her right couldn't help but laugh. Their voices were sharp, mocking, as if they saw her struggle as some kind of joke. Tasha's cheeks burned, the heat of humiliation rising faster than she could push it down. She turned away, hoping to escape their cruel amusement, but the laughter followed her, echoing in her ears. She could see them out of the corner of her eye, leaning back in their chairs, exchanging smirks, their eyes gleaming with superiority. The cruel reality hit harder than anything they could have said. She wasn't just struggling for a meal, she was struggling in front of an audience, one that had no intention of looking away. And then, from behind her, the soft clink of another unwanted sound. An elderly woman sitting alone at a nearby table shook her head slowly, a faint sigh escaping her lips. It wasn't the sympathy that Tasha wanted to see, but pity, quiet, disapproving pity. The kind of look that made Tasha feel like she was nothing more than a statistic, a face in the crowd that didn't matter, didn't belong. The woman didn't say a word, but the glance, the slight dip of her head, spoke volumes. Tasha's stomach twisted, as if the very act of her presence in this space was a burden. She could almost hear the thoughts running through the woman's mind. She's just like the others, isn't she? Always asking for help, always needing something more. Mom? Malik's voice pierced through the haze of embarrassment, soft and uncertain, a question that stung more than any insult. She turned to him, and for a moment all she could see was the innocence in his eyes, the small crease of concern on his forehead as he tried to make sense of what was happening. Her heart cracked as she fought to hold herself together, to shield him from the storm inside her. Mom, what's wrong? His voice was gentle, laced with the pure confusion of a child who had never known such weight. Tasha swallowed hard, her throat tight, the lump of humiliation lodged in her chest. She couldn't answer him, couldn't give him the truth, couldn't explain that the world wasn't fair, that there would be times like this when she would have to swallow her pride and sacrifice her dignity just to survive. She forced a smile, but it was thin, brittle, a facade she wore because she had no other choice. She kept her voice steady, her hands shaking slightly as she reached down and squeezed Malik's small hand. "It's okay, sweetie," she whispered, forcing the words out. "Everything's fine. We'll figure it out." But inside, Tasha knew the truth. She was drowning. Every moment she spent here, in front of those eyes, the eyes of strangers who would never understand, felt like one more step toward losing herself. The silence of the moment felt like a thunderstorm on the horizon, imminent and suffocating. Tasha's hand trembled as it reached into her purse for the last time, fingers brushing against the cold metal of the coins, the rough texture of crumpled bills. Her heart raced, the weight of the situation pressing down on her chest like a vice. She had counted this money. She knew there was enough for a simple meal. But now the register's total stared back at her like a cruel reminder that she was wrong. The gap was small, just $3.25. But it felt like an impossible chasm. Her pulse quickened, and for a brief moment, everything around her seemed to blur. The world felt too big, too loud, and she was just one small person, stranded in the middle of it all. The cashier's voice cut through the panic like a knife, cold and impersonal. "If you don't have enough money, you'll need to leave your ID or leave the restaurant," she said, her words so matter-of-fact, so devoid of any trace of humanity. The sharpness of her tone sent a chill down Tasha's spine, as if the woman was simply stating the rules of a game Tasha hadn't known she was playing. The word leave hung in the air like a sentence, a judgment, a condemnation. Tasha's chest tightened as her hand stopped moving. The coins in her palm felt heavier now, each one a reminder of how little she had left. She had come here hoping for a small victory, a sliver of happiness for Malik. But now the walls of the restaurant seemed to close in on her. The air thickened, stifling, as the other customers' eyes seemed to weigh down on her, their glances a sharp contrast to the warmth she had hoped for. Malik, unaware of the gravity of the situation, stood by her side, his face lit with confusion. His small voice, filled with innocence and curiosity, made Tasha's heart ache. "Are we getting kicked out, Mom?" he asked, his words a soft question that pierced her with the force of 1,000 truths. He had no idea how much she wanted to shield him from this, how much she wanted to protect him from the ugliness of a world that could be so indifferent, so unkind. His face, searching her eyes for reassurance, was the very picture of innocence, unfamiliar with rejection, untouched by the harshness that lay just beneath the surface. Tasha's breath caught in her throat. She bent down, her knees feeling like they might buckle beneath her. She reached out and gently placed her hand on Malik's shoulder, her fingers trembling against the fabric of his jacket. She forced a smile, though it felt like the weakest thing she had ever done, and whispered, "It's okay, sweetie. Don't worry, everything's fine." Her words were hollow, barely more than a murmur of what she wished were true. She had to keep it together, had to shield Malik from the ugly truth that was unfolding in front of them. But in that moment, as her gaze flickered across the room, she could feel the weight of the world crashing down on her. The cashier's eyes, the cold indifference, the judgmental glances from the other customers. It all felt like a reflection of everything she had faced, everything she had fought against, and yet everything she was still losing. She stood up slowly, her body heavy with exhaustion, and forced herself to move toward the counter, feeling the sting of humiliation like an open wound. The world around her felt distant, as if she were moving through a haze. She could hear the faint murmur of voices behind her, the laughter of the young men, the clink of silverware from the other tables. But it all felt muffled, distant. All she could focus on was the hollow ache in her chest and the feeling that she was fading, slipping through the cracks of a world that seemed to have no place for someone like her. Malik's voice brought her back, soft and worried. "Mom, I'm scared," he whispered. And in that moment, Tasha realized she was terrified too. Terrified that she would fail him, that she would never be able to protect him from the cold, unfeeling world outside. From her corner seat beneath the flickering ceiling light, Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. Her hands remained wrapped around a paper cup of tea, its warmth barely registering against the rising heat in her chest. She had watched the entire scene unfold, the trembling hands, the crumpled bills, the cashier's dismissive voice like cold metal scraping across stone. She saw Tasha's jaw tighten, her shoulders sink, and the desperation behind her smile as she tried to comfort her son with lies she never should have had to say. Malik's question, "Are we getting kicked out?" still hung in the air like smoke after a fire. The whole place had grown quiet, but it wasn't compassion, it was spectatorship. Jasmine knew that silence. She'd heard it in courtrooms and on Capitol Hill, moments when injustice was about to happen, and no one dared stop it. Her grip tightened on the cup, fingers twitching with restraint. But when the cashier shifted toward the phone, clearly reaching for the manager, Jasmine moved, slowly, deliberately. Not out of impulse, but with the weight of every mother who's ever been told she doesn't belong. She stood, her chair sliding back, with a low scrape against the tile that seemed to wake the room. The people who'd been so eager to stare now fell silent, their gazes narrowing in confusion. Jasmine walked with the kind of calm that made people uneasy. Silent strength wrapped in purpose. Each step toward the counter felt like a challenge to the atmosphere itself. She passed the judgmental glances, the whispering teens, the old woman who'd offered pity but not help, and she never once broke eye contact with the cashier. As she reached the register, she pulled her wallet from her coat with precision. No theatrics, no hesitation. Her credit card slid across the counter with a quiet finality. The cashier blinked, caught off guard. Jasmine's voice came low, steady, unmistakably commanding. "I'll cover the bill." Her tone was neither kind nor cold, it was clear, certain. Then she added, locking eyes with the wide-eyed Malik just behind his mother, "And make sure he gets a birthday cake, a real one." The silence in the room shifted, not broken, but redefined. No one spoke. The manager, who had begun approaching, stopped mid-step. The cashier looked from the card to Jasmine's face, searching for a reaction, some signal of ego, of attention-seeking. But there was none. Just that quiet, resolute calm. Jasmine turned slightly, her eyes meeting Tasha's for the first time. No words passed between them. None were needed. In Jasmine's eyes, there was no pity, only respect, a silent recognition. The look of one woman telling another, "You're not invisible. Not today." Tasha stood motionless, her fingers clenched tightly around the crumpled $5 bill as she slowly walked back to the table, the weight of every step bearing down on her. Her heart pounded in her chest, the shame of the situation washing over her like a wave that wouldn't recede. She didn't want to look at Malik, didn't want to see the confusion in his innocent eyes as he tried to make sense of what was happening. He had no idea what was unfolding, what kind of world he was growing up in. A world where a mother's worth was measured by the empty spaces in her wallet, the fleeting opportunities she could grasp for him. She had failed him, she thought. She had promised him a celebration, something simple and sweet, and now she was returning, defeated, with nothing more than a handful of excuses. But then, as she reached the booth, her breath caught in her throat. The scene in front of her stopped everything. Malik was sitting there, not with the sad, vacant look of disappointment she expected, but with a wide grin, his face aglow with pure joy. He was sitting in front of a full meal, fries, a giant taco, and a drink, and beside the plate was a small cake, a birthday candle flickering brightly atop it. The sight was surreal. Tasha blinked twice as if trying to make sense of it, but the reality of the moment didn't change. Malik's excitement was palpable, his little hands clapping with glee as he eagerly looked up at her, the childlike wonder in his eyes. The joy that could only come from an untainted heart was like a sharp contrast to the anxiety she had felt just moments before. Her mind raced to catch up with her emotions. The $5 she had just desperately clutched, the feeling of inadequacy that had consumed her, seemed so insignificant in the face of this unexpected act. She glanced around, her eyes searching for any answers, any clue as to how this had happened. Who had done this? She turned to the cashier, her voice shaky as she asked, "What's going on? Why is there food? Why is there a cake?" She could barely understand what had happened herself. The cashier looked at her with a mixture of uncertainty and quiet respect. She seemed almost taken aback by the question, as though it were an ordinary moment she'd witnessed many times, but for Tasha, it was anything but ordinary. "A woman paid for your meal," the cashier explained, her tone softer now, almost apologetic. "She didn't want you to have to leave without something. She just wanted you and your son to have a proper birthday. She wanted to make sure you could enjoy this moment, even if just for today." Tasha's breath caught, a lump forming in her throat as the weight of the words settled in. She turned to look at Malik, whose smile had not faded. He was too young to understand the full significance of the gesture, too innocent to know that the meal and the cake were not part of some birthday magic, but the simple, selfless act of a stranger who saw her struggle and refused to let her fail in front of her child. For a moment, Tasha felt something unfamiliar, a brief flicker of warmth. It was the smallest sliver of light in a world that had often felt so dark. But as quickly as the warmth came, it was replaced with a sharp, nagging reality. Why? Why did this woman, this stranger, feel the need to intervene? Why had it taken the kindness of a completely unknown person for her to get something so simple? A birthday meal, a cake. The unfairness of it burned in her chest. There were too many people in the world, just like her, who would never have this moment, who would never have someone step in and offer a slice of humanity when everything else felt impossible. She glanced back at the cashier, who had turned away to tend to other customers, and then to Malik, still sitting happily in front of the meal that should have been hers to provide. The joy in his eyes should have been hers too, the fulfillment of a mother's promise. But instead it was someone else who had to step in, someone who probably didn't even know the depth of her struggle. And that was the hardest truth of all. In a world so full of wealth and power, where justice seemed so distant, it was kindness that had to bridge the gap. Tasha took a deep breath, her eyes still locked on Malik, who was now picking up his taco, completely unaware of the storm of emotion swirling inside his mother. In that moment she knew, more than ever, how fragile this world was, how deeply unfair it could be, and how far she would go to make sure he never saw the same struggles she had to face. The simple act of a stranger had given her hope. Hope she wasn't sure she deserved, but that she would cling to for as long as she could. Jasmine moved quietly, her steps deliberate and measured, as if she were walking through something sacred, something fragile. The air around the table shifted as she sat down across from Tasha and Malik, her presence not demanding attention, but commanding respect. She didn't need to announce herself. There was a quiet strength in her demeanor that spoke louder than any words could. Malik, still absorbed in the meal in front of him, didn't even notice the shift in the atmosphere, his small face lighting up with a smile that belonged to someone who had no knowledge of the struggles his mother had faced or the quiet rebellion that had just unfolded in the room. Jasmine's eyes flickered over to him, and for a moment she allowed herself to smile back, the weight of her own history reflected in the innocence of his. Tasha, however, couldn't pull her gaze away from the woman sitting across from her. Her mind was still racing, trying to comprehend the events that had just transpired. The unexpected kindness, the stranger who had covered her meal, the birthday cake that Malik had been gifted without explanation. As Tasha stared at Jasmine, the realization hit her. She knew who this woman was. She had seen her before, heard her name in the news, seen her stand before the world, demanding justice for those who couldn't speak for themselves. But now sitting before her, Jasmine didn't carry the weight of a title or the formality of a politician. She carried something far more powerful: empathy, solidarity, the unspoken understanding of what it meant to struggle, to fight for your family, for dignity, in a world that so often overlooked you. Tasha blinked, the confusion and awe in her eyes deepening as the recognition sank in. You're Jasmine Crockett, aren't you?" The words slipped from her lips, almost in disbelief, as if the woman sitting before her could not possibly be the same figure she had seen on the news, the one who had stood so confidently against the injustices that ran rampant in the world. Jasmine didn't flinch. Her eyes met Tasha's without hesitation, her smile genuine but not patronizing, simply knowing. "I'm just another mother," Jasmine replied softly, her voice steady and full of conviction, yet warm with the comfort of shared experience. "I've had empty pockets too. I've walked into places like this, not knowing how I'd make it through, feeling the weight of every choice. But you carry on because you have to." Her words weren't some grand declaration. They weren't intended to inspire or to elevate her in any way. They were the quiet truths of someone who had been there, who had felt the sting of defeat, the raw vulnerability that came with being just one small person in a world that never quite saw you. There was no sense of superiority in her tone, only the raw honesty of someone who knew exactly what Tasha was feeling and what she had been forced to swallow in order to survive. For a long moment, Tasha didn't speak. She just sat there staring at Jasmine, as if the simple truth of what she had said had settled over her like a blanket. In the midst of the chaos, in the whirlwind of failure and fear, Jasmine had offered her something more valuable than a free meal: a sense of recognition, the understanding that she wasn't alone, that the struggle she faced wasn't hers to bear in isolation. The quiet power of that recognition was almost overwhelming. Tasha's hand slowly found its way to her heart, emotion so subtle it was almost imperceptible, but it was as if she was holding on to the fragile moment that Jasmine had created between them. This wasn't just an act of kindness. It was a bond forged in the shared weight of their experiences. An acknowledgement that despite the world's indifference, they had both carried the same burdens. Jasmine didn't need the world to know her name. She didn't need accolades or applause. In this moment with Tasha and Malik, she had done something far more meaningful. She had seen them, truly seen them, and offered something that went beyond charity. She had given them dignity. As Tasha sat there, she felt the tension that had gripped her chest slowly begin to loosen. The world outside was still the same battles, the same struggles, but for just a moment she could breathe. And in that breath, she understood that sometimes kindness isn't about grand gestures or sweeping acts of heroism. Sometimes it's simply about sitting down, looking someone in the eye and saying, "I see you." Jasmine watched Tasha for a moment, noting the quiet tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes darted nervously to the side as if unsure how much to reveal. She had been through it all, the sting of rejection, the feeling of being invisible, and she could see the same battle lines etched across Tasha's face. For a brief second, the silence between them stretched out like an ocean, vast and filled with the unspoken weight of shared experience. Finally, Jasmine broke it, her voice gentle but steady, cutting through the heaviness. "What did you do before this?" she asked, her eyes soft but intent. Like she wasn't just asking about a job, but about the person Tasha had been before life had knocked her down. Tasha hesitated, her fingers toying with the edge of her napkin, the movements small and almost subconscious. Her lips parted to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She glanced at Malik, who was happily munching on his meal, unaware of the storm that had been raging just a few minutes ago. Jasmine waited, her presence unwavering, giving Tasha the space she needed without pressing. It was the kind of quiet support that spoke volumes, that didn't need to fill the air with noise, but simply let the truth emerge in its own time. Finally, Tasha looked up, her gaze meeting Jasmine's with a mixture of vulnerability and pride. "I used to work as an office assistant," she said softly, her voice tight with the memories of a life that felt so distant now. "I loved the work. I was good at it." Her words were steady, but there was a slight catch, a thin edge of emotion that betrayed the truth buried beneath. Jasmine nodded, sensing the undercurrent of pain in Tasha's voice. "What happened?" she asked, the question as much about the hardship she had faced as the story Tasha was about to tell. Tasha's eyes darkened slightly, the flicker of emotion quickly concealed by a practiced mask. "When the pandemic hit," she began, her voice quieter now, "they cut back on everything. I was one of the first to go. They told me it was temporary, that they would bring me back when things got better. But things never got better." She exhaled sharply, her gaze dropping to the table, as if the weight of the words was more than she could carry. "I've been looking for work ever since, but it's hard. When you're over 30, single, and have a kid, no one really wants to hire you, not when there's someone younger, someone without a kid. They tell you it's about experience, but you know deep down it's not about that. It's about who you are, who they think you are." Jasmine felt her jaw tighten, her grip on the table momentarily steadying herself. The unfairness of it was like a punch to the gut, the system rigged against people like Tasha, people like her. She didn't need to ask why. It was clear. The world hadn't just left Tasha behind. It had discarded her, and for no reason other than circumstances beyond her control. Jasmine leaned forward slightly, her voice a calm storm. "That's a system failure, not a personal one," she said, her words firm with quiet fury. "You shouldn't be struggling to prove your worth just because the world decided you didn't fit some mold. The fact that you're here, still fighting, still trying to make things work, that's what matters." Her gaze softened as she spoke, acknowledging the strength it took to keep moving in the face of such relentless hardship. Tasha looked up at Jasmine, her eyes raw with the unspoken weight of everything she had been through. She nodded slowly, her lips pressing together in a thin line, but there was something in her expression now, something like relief mixed with the remnants of her own hard-won dignity. For a brief moment, it felt as though the world had shifted. Jasmine wasn't just a politician, a figurehead in the fight for justice. She was a human being who understood. And in that moment, that understanding meant everything. Jasmine's gaze softened as she sat back, the weight of the conversation still hanging in the air like a storm before the calm. There was an understanding between them now, a quiet recognition of the hardships they both carried. The bustling noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away, replaced by the faint rhythm of Tasha's heartbeat as she processed what had just transpired. Jasmine's words weren't just an offer, they were a lifeline. She could feel the years of struggle, the silent fights against a world that constantly overlooked her, rising up in a rush of emotion that she had long kept buried. For a moment, Jasmine simply watched her, allowing the silence to linger, knowing that the next words she spoke would be more than just an invitation, they would be a turning point. Finally, Jasmine reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card, its edges crisp and clean. She slid it across the table with a purpose, her hands steady, her eyes not leaving Tasha's face. "Come to my office tomorrow," she said, her voice calm but layered with an undeniable strength. "We're looking for someone like you, someone who's been through the fire and still stands, someone who knows what it means to keep going, even when everything else tells you to quit." The words settled into the space between them, and Tasha felt the weight of them as if they were something solid, something tangible. Jasmine's words weren't just a job offer. They were a recognition of the battle Tasha had fought alone for so long, a battle she hadn't expected anyone to see, let alone acknowledge. Tasha's hand hovered over the card for a moment, her fingers trembling as she reached for it. She hadn't known what to expect when she walked into this place, hadn't dared to imagine that the world might bend in her favor for once. But here it was, a sliver of possibility in her hand, something she hadn't even dared to wish for in her quietest moments. For the first time, she wasn't just a statistic, She was someone who could make a difference. Her eyes flickered to Malik, still enjoying his meal with that innocent smile of his, the smile that had stayed with her despite everything, the smile that reminded her of the promise she had made him, that she would give him a better life, that even in their darkest moments, she would find a way. Malik, blissfully unaware of the full weight of the conversation, looked up at his mother, his eyes searching hers with a quiet, steady gaze. He had been listening, even if he didn't understand the words. His gaze held a quiet confidence that sent a sharp ache through Tasha's chest, a mix of pride and sadness. He was looking at her with something she hadn't seen in so long: belief. For the first time in ages, he believed in her. He believed that they were worth more than the hand they had been dealt. Tasha's heart swelled with the unspoken promise that passed between them in that moment, a promise of hope, of redemption, of new beginnings. Tasha's fingers curled around the business card, and she held it in her palm as though it were a lifeline, the simplest but most significant thing she had held in years. She looked at Jasmine, at the woman sitting across from her, who had not only seen her, but had given her something: respect. It wasn't just the card or the promise of a job. It was the understanding, the acknowledgement that Tasha wasn't just a mother struggling to survive. She was worthy of standing tall, of fighting back. For the first time in what felt like forever, Tasha felt seen, truly seen. Not as a burden or an afterthought, but as someone with value, with strength. Tasha's gaze softened, and a lump formed in her throat, the tears threatening to spill. But she didn't let them fall. Not yet. She couldn't. Not with Malik sitting across from her, looking at her like she was a superhero. He believed in her, and for the first time, she believed in herself too. As the door to the restaurant swung open, a brisk wind swept inside, carrying with it the cool promise of the evening's end. The bright neon lights outside cast a soft glow on the pavement, and the night felt quieter somehow, as though the world outside was still catching its breath from the quiet storm that had passed within. Tasha took a deep breath, the weight of the day still heavy in her chest but tempered by something she hadn't expected: hope. Malik, oblivious to the complexity of the moments they had just lived through, skipped ahead, his small hands wrapped tightly around the little cake box Jasmine had given him. His smile was wide and unburdened, the kind of smile that only a child could wear when the world was at its darkest, and yet still able to find a reason to believe in joy. Tasha walked beside him, the steady rhythm of her footsteps matching the rising tide of thoughts in her head. She still couldn't entirely believe what had happened. Jasmine Crockett, the woman who had stood so firmly in front of millions, a voice of power and change, had simply sat with her, offered her respect, and given her something more than a free meal. It had been a moment of recognition, an acknowledgement that her struggle was seen, her resilience valued. Tasha had lived through so much, and yet she had always felt invisible, as though the world was too busy to notice how hard she fought to make things better for Malik. But in Jasmine's presence, she had felt something else, something she had almost forgotten existed: dignity. Jasmine had not just paid for their meal, she had given Tasha a sense of self-worth, something that had been beaten down by years of dismissal and rejection. As they reached the car, Tasha paused, her hand still on the door handle, her heart pounding with something that felt like a mix of gratitude and disbelief. She turned back, her eyes scanning the restaurant's door one last time, as if to ensure that this wasn't some fleeting dream, something she had imagined in the midst of her desperation. She saw Jasmine standing just inside, her figure a calm silhouette against the warm light. Her gaze was steady, not demanding anything in return, not expecting acknowledgement. Tasha's breath caught in her throat, and before she could stop herself, the words spilled out, thick with emotion. "Thank you," Tasha said, her voice barely above a whisper, the weight of her gratitude far too heavy for the simple words. But she couldn't help herself. "Thank you, not just for the meal." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away quickly, her throat tightening as the reality of the moment finally settled into her bones. It wasn't the food that mattered, it wasn't the cake. It was the simple, profound kindness that Jasmine had shown, the kind of kindness that acknowledged Tasha not as a burden or an invisible person, but as someone worthy of care, respect, and an opportunity to rise. Tasha hadn't expected anything when she walked into that restaurant. She had expected to fight, to scrape by just to get through the day. But Jasmine had offered her something more. She had given her the sense that she didn't have to fight alone. Jasmine met her gaze from across the lot, and for a moment it felt as though the entire world held its breath. Then Jasmine's lips curled into a small, understanding smile. It wasn't a smile that sought praise or recognition. It was the smile of someone who had been there, who understood the depths of struggle, but also understood the power of small acts of defiance against a system that sought to break you. She took a step toward Tasha, her voice steady and calm, cutting through the night air. "You don't need a law to change your life," Jasmine said, her words soft but unyielding. "Sometimes all it takes is a cake and a chance." Her words hit Tasha like a wave crashing against the shore, sweeping away the last remnants of doubt that had clung to her. A chance. That was all she needed, all she had ever needed. The system had tried to push her down, to make her believe that she wasn't enough, that her struggles didn't matter. But in that single moment, Jasmine had offered her something the world had denied her for so long. A chance. Tasha could feel the heaviness in her chest beginning to lift, the burden of years of fighting alone starting to dissolve. For the first time, she saw a way forward, a path that didn't feel like an endless uphill battle. It was a path that included not just survival, but something more. Hope. Jasmine's gaze softened as she saw Tasha's face, the raw emotion written clearly across it. There was no pity in Jasmine's expression, only a quiet understanding. She had been where Tasha was now, fighting for her place in a world that often didn't care. But in that moment, Jasmine didn't see a struggling mother. She saw a woman who had fought hard, who still had so much strength to give. And she knew that Tasha deserved more than just a moment of kindness. She deserved the chance to show the world what she was capable of. Tasha stood there for a moment longer, her heart racing with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. She looked down at Malik, still happily holding the cake box, his excitement never fading. He hadn't yet grasped the weight of the gesture, the significance of the chance that had been offered to them. But she did. And in that moment, as she looked at the world through her son's innocent eyes, she saw something else. Possibility. She wasn't just a woman trying to survive. She was a woman who had the power to change, to rise above the obstacles that had kept her down for so long. And it wasn't just because of a free meal, it was because someone had believed in her. As she turned to get in the car, Tasha took one last glance back at Jasmine. She saw the woman standing there, strong and unassuming, with a quiet resolve in her eyes. Jasmine had given her more than just a handout. She had given her a future. Tasha smiled through the tears, whispering under her breath, "Thank you. Thank you for giving me a chance." With Malik still bouncing in the back seat, she drove away, the world feeling just a little bit lighter, just a little bit more bearable. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she had more than just a fight ahead of her. She had a future, and she wasn't going to waste it. Jasmine stood there watching as Tasha and Malik made their way toward the door, their figures framed by the warm golden glow spilling from the restaurant's windows. The quiet clink of silverware and soft chatter from the other tables seemed to fade as she followed their movements with quiet intent. There was a subtle grace in the way they moved together, Tasha's posture still carrying the burden of her struggles. Yet there was something in her steps that now felt lighter. Malik skipped ahead, his small body a blur of energy, still holding his precious cake with the kind of joy that only a child could understand. Jasmine felt a stir in her chest, a quiet but steady pull that anchored her in the moment. She couldn't explain why she was so deeply affected by what she had witnessed. It wasn't just the act of giving them a meal, or even the cake. It was something deeper, something she had seen in Tasha's eyes. It was the spark of something long extinguished by the weight of unrelenting hardship, now flickering back to life. She saw it when Tasha had looked up at her, the faintest trace of hope breaking through the exhaustion, as if the offer of something more than just survival had finally cracked through the walls built by years of disappointment. And now, as mother and son stepped into the rain-soaked night, Jasmine felt an unspoken promise settle in the pit of her stomach. This could be the beginning of something different. The rain had started to fall in light, misty drops, as if the sky itself were shedding its own weight. The pavement outside the restaurant gleamed, its surface reflecting the neon lights of the sign above, the soft, colored glow blurring into the droplets that danced on the ground. It was such a simple scene. Mother and child walking through the rain, the world continuing to spin around them. But there was something about it that felt like a quiet rebellion against the injustice they had faced. Something small yet infinitely significant. Jasmine stood motionless for a moment, watching the two of them, her heart tightening with a mixture of hope and sorrow. The world outside was cold and indifferent, the streets slick with the remnants of a storm that had long passed. Yet in this fleeting moment, beneath the rain-soaked sky and the artificial lights, there was an undeniable warmth in the simple act of kindness that had unfolded. Jasmine watched as Tasha pulled her coat tighter around her body, her face lifted slightly as she walked. The slightest hint of something different in the way she carried herself now. It wasn't confidence. It was more than that. It was the beginning of something new, something they hadn't been able to imagine before. And Jasmine understood that. She understood what it felt like to be broken by the world and then given the chance to rebuild, to feel human again, to remember that there was still something worth fighting for. Tasha stopped for a moment at the edge of the sidewalk, and for the briefest of seconds, she turned back. Her eyes met Jasmine's, a silent exchange passing between them. There was no need for words. The acknowledgement in Tasha's gaze said it all. It was a moment of recognition. Tasha was no longer just a mother fighting to survive. She had been given something. She had been seen. In that moment, Jasmine knew she had done what she had set out to do, even if it was small. She had offered not just food, but a chance. And that chance, however fragile, was everything. Jasmine's breath caught as she watched Tasha and Malik step into the rain, the neon lights reflecting in the puddles, as if the whole world was holding its breath. The sound of the rain falling around them, combined with the soft echoes of their footsteps, created a rhythm that felt almost cinematic. An ordinary moment in a world that wasn't always kind, but a moment that held so much more than it seemed. Tasha and Malik, two souls who had been crushed by a system that didn't care, were now walking towards something new. It wasn't just survival, it was the promise of a future. And Jasmine, from her small corner of the world, knew she had done something that mattered. In that small, quiet moment, there was hope. As the door swung shut behind them, Jasmine turned back to the table, her mind still on the image of them walking into the rain-soaked night. It was a strange thing, this sense of connection, of knowing that something so simple could change everything. The injustice of Tasha's situation, the fact that she had to fight for something as basic as a chance, was still very much present. But Jasmine understood that change was a process, and that it began with one small act of kindness. This wasn't the end for Tasha. It was just the beginning. And Jasmine believed, with everything inside her, that this simple moment would ripple out into something far bigger. Sometimes all it takes is one person to see you, and when that happens, everything changes. Jasmine took one last look at the door, feeling the weight of the world pressed down on her shoulders, but for once it didn't feel so heavy. For once there was something else, something that had been absent for far too long. Hope. The rain outside had softened, the once fierce downpour now a gentle mist that clung to the earth like a whispered promise. Yet the storm inside Tasha's heart was still raging. She had walked into that restaurant defeated, almost resigned to the idea that the world had nothing more to offer her. The same world that had stripped her of dignity, had kept her invisible, and had made every effort to simply survive feel like an act of rebellion. But as she stood on the wet sidewalk, Malik's hand tightly clasped in hers, something had shifted. She felt something in the way she walked, in the way she breathed, in the way she now looked at the world with eyes that had been opened, if only for a moment. What had changed? The simple act of kindness from a stranger, from someone who had every reason not to help but chose to anyway? It wasn't just the free meal, or the cake that Malik held so tightly. It was something far deeper. It was the recognition, the acknowledgement that Tasha wasn't just another statistic, another woman abandoned by the system. She was a mother, she was a person, and for the first time in years, she felt like she mattered. But as they walked, Tasha's mind couldn't shake the truth that lay beneath the surface. Why had it taken someone like Jasmine, someone in power, someone with the resources to make a difference, to give her this small glimpse of humanity? Why had it taken someone outside the system, someone who could have easily turned a blind eye, to make her feel seen? The unfairness of it all clenched at her gut. Why should anyone have to fight for this? Why should anyone have to claw their way through life just to be heard, just to feel like they're worth more than the burden the world seems to place on their shoulders? The question burned inside her as she glanced at Malik, still unaware of the weight of the world she was carrying. He was smiling, his face bright with the innocence of a child who had never known hunger, never known the weight of not having enough. For a moment, she wished she could protect him from the harshness she had known. She wanted to give him the world, but all she had were these fleeting moments, these brief glimpses of hope, and she couldn't help but wonder how long they would last before the world turned cold again. And then it hit her. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This wasn't just about feeding her son or keeping a roof over their heads. This was about something bigger, something she hadn't allowed herself to think about in years. It was about change. The very thing that had been so elusive in her life was now in her hands. Fragile, yes, but it was there. The opportunity. She knew that nothing would be handed to her. She knew that she would have to fight, that she would have to claw her way through the next chapter of her life, just like she had through every other chapter. But for the first time, she understood that change was possible. Not because the system had finally decided to treat her fairly, but because sometimes you have to create the change. You have to become the change. The world, for all its cruelty, couldn't strip her of that power. No one could take that away from her. Not anymore. Jasmine's act of kindness had opened her eyes to the truth she had been ignoring for so long. It wasn't just about fighting the system. It was about standing up for what was right, for what she deserved. It was about demanding a future for Malik that was different from her own. A future where he would never have to fight as she did, where the weight of poverty would never hold him down. She wouldn't let him inherit the same world she had known. She wouldn't allow him to grow up in a world where his worth was measured by the contents of his wallet, the color of his skin, or the circumstances of his birth. As they walked on, the mist gently falling around them, Tasha felt something stir deep inside. It wasn't just anger or resentment for the system that had failed her. It wasn't even the faint flicker of hope that Jasmine had ignited in her. It was something much stronger: determination. She had been knocked down by life over and over again, but she wasn't done yet. This wasn't the end of her story. This was only the beginning. She glanced at Malik, his face still glowing with the joy of a child who had received a simple gift, and she knew deep in her soul that she would do whatever it took to protect that joy, to protect his innocence from a world that would try to grind him down, to rob him of his worth before he ever had the chance to see his full potential. It was then that she realized this was her fight, not just for herself, but for Malik, for every other person out there who had been told they weren't enough, who had been discarded by a system that claimed to care but showed its true face in moments like these. The world would not change overnight, and she couldn't do it alone. But in that quiet moment, walking into the mist, Tasha understood that she didn't need to do it alone. She had her son, and she had her own strength, and that was enough to make a difference. The world had always been unfair, had always been unkind. But Jasmine's simple act of kindness had sparked something in her, a flame that refused to be extinguished, a belief that, despite everything, change was possible. And maybe, just maybe, it started with something as small as a cake and a chance. But for Tasha, that moment had been more than just a chance. It had been the start of her own revolution, the start of her own fight for dignity, for respect, for a future that Malik deserved. And she would not stop until she saw it through. Tasha walked alongside Malik, her steps now deliberate, each one carrying more weight than before. The rain had softened into a mist, but the heaviness in her chest remained. She had been given a glimpse of something she never thought she would see. Someone had stepped in when the world had turned its back. Jasmine's simple act of kindness had sparked something deep inside her, something she hadn't felt in years. The feeling of being seen, not as a burden, not as an afterthought, but as someone who mattered. And that feeling was dangerous. Dangerous because it made her question everything she had accepted as normal. For so long, she had fought alone, struggled against the world that seemed to have no place for her. But in that quiet moment, in that unexpected act of compassion, she had realized something. Change wouldn't come from waiting for someone else to fix things. It had to start with her. The injustice she had faced, the discrimination that had shaped her life, those things couldn't be ignored any longer. They couldn't be accepted as the norm. Her thoughts raced as she looked at Malik, still blissfully unaware of the deeper currents swirling around them. He was holding the small cake, his excitement pure and undiluted. But Tasha knew deep in her gut that his future wouldn't be as simple as this moment. The same system that had nearly crushed her would try to do the same to him. She wasn't going to let that happen. She had seen what could be done with a little kindness, a little recognition, and she wasn't about to let that flame of hope die out. Jasmine's words rang in her mind. Sometimes all it takes is a cake and a chance. She wasn't just talking about a meal or a birthday. She was talking about opportunity, about dignity, about the power of seeing someone for who they really are, and not just what they have or don't have. Tasha felt a surge of determination, a call to action that surged through her veins. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about fighting back. She wasn't going to let Malik grow up in a world that told him he was less than. She wasn't going to let him inherit the struggles she had faced. This was her fight now, not just for herself, but for him, for everyone who had been pushed to the margins. She wouldn't wait any longer for the world to change on its own. She would be the change, and she would take that first step forward, not knowing exactly where it would lead, but knowing one thing for sure. She wouldn't let fear stop her. The world could be unjust, but she would no longer be a bystander. The fight had begun. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.